Welcome back.
Welcome, friend.
Okay, episode 3, season 2. We're going to get into cross-cultural friendships, what not to say to your Black, queer, trans, non-binary friends.
Absolutely.
Let's get to dumb shit men say. Because this is not a quote.
This is real life happening as we speak at the time of taping this
January
episode.
2023.
There is one named George Santos.
We think.
Exactly. Who might just be like a Russian bot. Because at this point, everything that has come out about this man has
Who's
been a
an
lie.
elected congressperson, let's just say, or recently elected.
Recently elected congressperson. And it is one thing after the next. So let's just start early on. He campaigned as an openly gay man of Brazilian heritage, who said that his maternal grandparents were Jewish and they fled persecution.
In the Holocaust.
Which was a lie. He said that his mother was Jewish, but he actually had said, I think on Facebook for many years, that he was an open Catholic. Okay. And then a Jewish publication called The Forward found no evidence to support his claim of any of this, that any of his ancestors were Jewish. And they also reviewed genealogy websites that suggested his grandparents had settled in Brazil, but were not Jewish. And his mother, now deceased, said that she regularly shared posts with Catholic themes and images of Jesus.
On her Facebook.
On her Facebook.
He also said that he worked at Goldman Sachs, which, for those who don't know, is one of the preeminent international investment firms in the world.
Yes.
And I think he said that he had gone to Harvard or was affiliated with Harvard.
All of these things are a lie. And he hasn't stepped down. What say you, friend?
Well, I think it really I think there's a lot of questions that come to mind. One, why the Republican Party hasn't forced him to step down.
Period.
Why facts aren't facts anymore. So what is a fact?
Yeah, you and I kind of talked about this, and I feel like we are being Kellyanne Conway'd, right? Like the moment she said alternative facts, I think the moment that the Trump administration, probably even prior to it takes years for these things to kind of take root. But, the Trump era began, we started to be told that up was down and down was up. And instead of us being outraged about it,
we're just like, oh, maybe he was confused about his life.
About his own heritage.
The other thing that is concerning, another thing that's concerning is that he has used different versions of his name in different venues over the last number of years. And so George Santos is part of his full name, but he has other parts of his name as well, which I don't remember and are unimportant. And he has used them publicly in public forums in incorporating different organizations, both nonprofit and for-profit.
Are you serious?
Yeah. And so there's this question of tracking. How does one find where he went to school if we don't know his name?
His actual name, yeah.
What's his actual birth date? Where is he from?
Here's the interesting part, though, that he has both leaned into like these privileged stereotypes as far as, Goldman Sachs and Harvard, but also leaned into marginalized and oppressed communities as well.
So that's really interesting to me. It's like you can't be everything to everyone. So he's Brazilian, Jewish, gay, Republican, a Trump supporter, first gen. Oh, but he went to Harvard and was affiliated with Goldman Sachs. So it's like you can't be both and.
But you know what I think it does? Like someone probably taught him like the rugged individualism stereotype or that trope. And he said, let me curate a persona around it. Yes, I come from this, under-resourced environment or this historically marginalized and oppressed community. But look at what I've done.
Right. It's like this idea of proximity to privilege, but I'm different. Right. So I have the proximity to Goldman and to Harvard, but that's not me. But it is, but I can fall back on those experiences, resources,
Isn't
network.
It's so American.
It's so American.
And the fact that it's all a lie is also so American. Like the entire thing is just fraudulent.
And no one cares.
Which is also so American.
Is it?
Unfortunately, yeah. I think so. Because I think that if people really gave a shit, his constituents especially would be like calling for his head. How could you, with a straight face, represent anyone if everything you told us about you was a lie?
And how can you be all things to all people? I was watching something that was recently posted on Twitter where he had started an organization in support of Trump, but was at an event that was focused on trans individuals who were supporting Trump, which to me makes no sense.
We have a lot to unpack there.
Right, but that's not what we're talking about today. And he's not trans. And I'm not saying he said he was trans, but it's this idea of being everyone to everyone all the time in every way except different. So therefore, you can be really popular.
Right, exactly.
It's really problematic. I think also as a representative in Congress, what do you represent? Who do you represent if we don't even know who you are?
And again, we go back to the Republican Party not like calling for his
removal.
And
also just the very scary underbelly of this, that where is this coming from? Who is he? Who's supporting his candidacy? Where is he getting the money? Because we know there's a lot of money in running for Congress.
Oh, absolutely.
Who's supporting him?
Yeah.
And why do they want him to win? Okay, so let's keep an eye out on Mr. Santos or whoever he is.
Exactly.
These coming months, but I think it's less a specific thing he said, but more how he maneuvered himself in this space and won.
Yeah.
And I think it's an important thing to keep our eye on.
For the foreseeable future, we'll continue to hold the position. And so, we were talking before about where we are in politics and how, people just want their interests met. It's party over everything. So it's another example of that.
Absolutely.
Alrighty, so let's talk about today's sponsor. We are back with our friends over at Wine Press.
Yes.
It is a wine shop. It's so adorable with wines that are curated from all over the world. They have 2 locations here in Boston.
One in Boston and one in Brookline.
And today we are sipping on a little something from Wine Press, and it is the Kamusha wine. So let's talk a little bit about it. Having faced racism in many forms and working in post-apartheid South Africa, Naya Muduka, who is the founder, committed himself not only to changing the culture of wine in South Africa, which we know is a big industry, but also creating one. The launch of the label, Kamusha Wines. He hopes with the launch of the label, Kamusha Wines, that it won't be true for generations to follow him. And also to the Shona people of Zimbabwe, Kamusha means your home, your roots, your origins. And after only a few years, Zimbabwe is now one of his largest export markets. And so we love a business with a cause. So many of Jyoti and Aaron's brands or wines that are in the shop all have this amazing history behind them, like Kamusha.
So cheers, friend. I also would like to say these wine glasses were a beautiful present you got me for Christmas, so thank you.
You are welcome. Let's see.
Ooh, that's good. Wow, that's really good.
Yeah. I'm not a red drinker usually, but I love it when it's like complex and full bodied. That's delicious.
I really like it. I am a red drinker and I really like it. Okay, this is an episode that I think a lot of our listeners and viewers have been asking for.
Oh, for sure.
Or if they haven't been asking for it, they've been interested in. And so not to keep anything kind of under wraps, we're an open book. We want to talk about it. And we're kind of starting it about our friendship, but the questions that come from it are way past us.
Yeah, for sure.
And this idea of cross-cultural friendships or friends befriending people who have different experiences than you do. And I think there's a lot of interest in us, but also how people can make friends who've had different experiences.
For sure. I think that visually, if for no other reason than just how we look, people are often surprised that we are friends.
I think that's true.
Yeah. And so we want to dig into a bit more about our friendship, because I think you mentioned this before. People say to you, how do you know Tashira? Like trying to dig into it.
Like it's some weird thing I've like been keeping from the world. And I think there's maybe I'm reading too far into it, but like, why would Tashira want to be friends with someone like you? And I think that's an interesting. Well, I think it comes from a place of like, you guys are so different.
Yeah.
Or I perceive you guys as so different. And this is something I said to you last night that I truly believe. And obviously, there are objective differences about our lives, where we came from, and our life experiences.
For sure.
But I actually don't think we're that different.
Not at all.
Right? And so I think that is something that has held us through our friendship. Not that you have to be the same as your friends at all, but I think that there is a core value to who we are and what we're seeking and who we want to be that has held us together.
Which is so meaningful. I mean, we're going to dig deeper into this, but I just had this flash thought of that is what people miss so often, right? When they don't have friendships that are across the gender binary, that are across sexual orientation or gender identity and presentation, that are across race, all these social constructs, you miss the chance to be like, oh, you too? Which is how friends are made. You like this thing too? You love retreats and sweat huts and eating healthy? You love Pilates, you love your family, you were close to your grandmother, like all these ways that we are so similar that we would have missed out on if we would have just gotten stuck. And this is not just because of us, right? These are societal issues. If we would have just gotten stuck at how we looked.
Mm-hmm. Or where we were.
Exactly.
Right? Like me coming into an academic institution, being married, and you being in law, right? There were all these things that like made us different,
Yeah,
but like brought us together
at the same time. And I think we have done the work to be able to move past that. And so someone is asking that right now, and I'm sure we've heard some iteration of that. Like, what does the work look like?
So this is a question that I kind of bristle at sometimes when people are like, I've really worked on myself or I've done the work, right? Because I feel as though that's something that's thrown around a lot lately without a lot of texture.
Yeah.
And so for me, what does that mean is that I have spent a lot of time and a lot of therapy and a lot of energy trying to figure out who I am, where I am, how I want to be, and where I want to be. And I think you've done the same.
Yeah, for sure.
And I think for both of us who've been, well, I don't want to speak for you, obviously, but I see this as one of our similarities is that we've been in careers and families that have expected us to do certain things at certain times, and we haven't always done that. Mm-hmm. But have always been really devoted.
Yeah, absolutely.
And have had to hold those things at the same time.
Yeah. I think that's part of it, right? It's this like path towards self-actualization and personal development and growth. I think to be a friend to anyone, we have to first be a friend to ourselves. So let's
talk about that. So I think that, I don't know about you, although I can imagine that, do people question sometimes how much time you like spending alone?
Yeah, I think it's very foreign to people, especially
Same.
people in my family.
Same. So I really like spending time alone.
Me too.
And I have found that to be really both cathartic and helpful in me understanding how I want to be with others.
Yeah, because if we know ourselves better, then we can be better in relationship. But I think when it comes down to cross-cultural relationships, the second thing I was going to say is it's also about being able to trust the person enough to know that if you get it wrong, that's okay.
Right. So I think this is something that's really important to talk about because it's something that we started talking about a little bit last night about, I said to you, like, why would someone like you not want to be friends with someone like me? And you said something really interesting. And you said a lot of Black women, well, I'm going to let you say it.
That a lot of Black women have issues with trusting white women. I think that we do not believe very often that this culture of politeness that you all have been kind of conditioned into, and that we haven't, right? We're taught to be strong, to be bold, to be, take up space. And I think that white women, not white men, white women are socialized very differently. And you can tell me if I'm wrong about that.
No, I think you're totally right. I think actually white women are socialized and taught to take up as little space as they possibly can,
So-
both physical and energetically.
And that is not part of the human condition. That it's impossible, right? And so what we often fear is this nice nastiness, this idea that you're just pretending to be nice because that's not actually who you are, right? In the staff meeting, you'll look at me, you'll laugh, you'll crack a joke, and then when it comes down to it, you'll give me a bad performance review, and I have no idea why, because you've been playing nice to my face this entire time. It's a complete lack of transparency. And so that carries to our personal relationships where we're just really afraid that when you're given the opportunity, you're gonna stab me in my back because you're not being your genuine self. So I think that's a really, really big part of it, not to mention the power and privilege that's often
Right.
held.
And I think vice versa, like the opposite, like why would my perception of why a black woman wouldn't want to be friends with me or is that I would say the wrong thing, that I would be perceived as being snobby or rich or condescending. Right. And so this idea of always walking on eggshells because I'm definitely going to do or say the wrong thing.
That's so interesting. And so it sounds like what you're saying is that like the friendship is wanted. It's just this fear of not getting it right. Okay. I can see that.
I mean, I'm not saying for like every white woman, but I think the feedback that I've gotten over the last 6 months is like, you're so lucky. And I am so lucky to have you as a friend and to have a friendship with someone who has totally different life experiences. I also don't think it is or should be an anomaly.
For sure. 100%.
And I also don't think of I don't think about my relationship with you. Like there's obviously a cross-cultural dynamic. Like there's frequently times where you'll say things that I don't understand and vice versa.
Yeah.
And like you're really interested. I think it is very sweet and it's funny that you're really interested in our Judaism because I'm also like not very knowledgeable of it. But but again, this is a part of my life that you haven't grown up with, right? Or weren't adjacent to. And so, right, there's obviously the cross-cultural dynamic of our friendship, but also we've just been friends for so long. I don't know.
But I've always felt like I could literally ask you questions and you wouldn't judge me. Like I'd just be
Why
like,
would I?
Margo, what the fuck? Why is this white woman posing with a chicken for her holiday picture? Is this...
There's a thing about chickens. You know, my mom collects them. Because there's this idea, I don't know about the like posing for holiday pictures. I do remember that one you sent me, but it's like, if I were living my highest self, I would have chickens.
Oh, your highest self.
Not how I envision my highest self, but like, it's like if you have chickens, you're like succeeding.
See, this is why we need to have these conversations.
Because you should be using your land.
This is wild to me. So it's like a badge of honor that I have.
Why do you think people in Cambridge have fucking chickens? Because it's not because we have like an agricultural society here. It's because it's like, oh, I have chickens. Do you have chickens?
But let me tell you why this is blowing my mind, dog. Like, my grandmother, they depended on chickens to eat, right? And so I grew up with my grandmother telling stories about how much she hated the chickens and how like dirty of an animal they are.
And it was a sign of poverty.
Of poverty. And so I could not imagine going home and my grandma would have chickens roaming around her front yard. She would be like, my God, Carlton, we have failed at life. We've gone back to our days of having an outhouse. But it's so interesting.
So being like a gentlewoman farmer, right, is a badge of honor.
Okay.
So bees.
Okay, I know about the bee thing.
Bees, chickens, having your own vegetable garden and fruit plot, all of those things bring you to a higher moral ground.
But nah, dog, because some of this too, I feel like it's a little George Santos. It's a little like, I have the privilege to be able to be a beekeeper.
Of course.
But also, I want to pretend to not be able to buy $12 a dozen organic eggs from the local market. So let me just have my own chickens. Like the thing itself is so absolutely privileged to play impoverished.
Well, so I think in some situations people aren't playing impoverished. I mean, I don't think people are I don't think people are playing impoverished. I think they're like, oh, look, I can save $12 a dozen. No, I mean, dozen eggs are not $12. Like $7 a dozen on organic eggs. And look, I'm teaching my children how to farm eggs and take care of chickens.
This is fascinating.
Okay, so there's also, yeah, there's definitely that.
Okay, but again, so this is in real time why it's important to have cross-cultural friendships, because we're learning things about how people live differently.
Right.
And I've always been a seeker, and we have that in common. Right? I'm from a very small town. The most difference that I knew in real life was from a book. Everyone I knew was Black and was Christian. They were white and they were Christian.
Until your high school.
Until high school, and I was part of this accelerated program.
Until your high school boyfriend.
And my high school, oh, that's what you want me to say. And then I got to meet people from all over my county, which was, you know, a little bit of a different way of life. And then by the time I was a senior, my high school boyfriend was white. He was a football player. And his family, his parents were from upstate New York, and they were pretty progressive, especially from my small town. They welcomed me into their family. And then I started to really see people live so differently from me. And it's so amazing to be able to kind of take all these different pieces of the world.
So for me, it was something that always felt really important to me. I think it started because I was always in spaces where I didn't feel like I belonged. So I was always in these very white, waspy, kind of privileged spaces as either one or the only Jewish kid. My parents did not have a lot of money, were really kind of breaking their backs to send me to these schools. It was really important to my dad in particular, being a kid of refugees, to like send his child to private school. That was a huge badge of honor for him.
Okay.
And so I always kind of felt different. So then when I would started meeting people who were also different, it felt, right, like not everyone is a member of the country club.
Oh, this is
not
so
everyone has a horse.
Yeah.
Right. I mean, obviously, that's it. And then I think you know this, but my junior year, I mean, it started before this, my kind of love of languages, and I volunteered a lot in local hospitals where I spoke Spanish. But then my junior year of high school, I did an exchange in Spain, and I lived in Spain with a host family for a year and did an exchange program. And that was kind of my first time immersed in a place where I was 100% different language, different religion, different culture, right? And it was really hard, and I really, really loved it. And I just saw it as such an opportunity of like, wow, I've never felt so much like myself in a place where I'm so different.
But I also am taking something away from this as well, that you understand my difference in certain white norm spaces. You will call it out before I will, even sometime.
Well, because I feel like it's my job. Remember when we went to that store?
Oh, yeah.
And you asked if we could record, and she acted like you were robbing the store.
Yeah, I do.
And I said, if you don't want to be racist.
Yeah, or it was last night we went out to dinner, and I said, you know, Margo, whenever I walk into a room, the first thing I do is I figure out where the other Black people are. And before I could finish a sentence, you were like, oh yeah, there's only one and he's working here, right? And so you knew and you were aware just as much as I was that moment of difference. And it likely is because, like you just said, you weren't the kid with the horses at the country club.
But it's also a very different thing, right? And so I've also, and we've talked about this, you know, at your birthday party last year, right? I was your only white friend that you invited.
Yeah.
And it wasn't lost on anyone.
Yeah.
And it wasn't a big deal.
No. And I wonder, like, if someone else would not have come. Like, they would have been maybe afraid, or, like you said, we talked about this, about how white people don't always have they don't have the experience of being the only. if you are going to be successful at some point as a person of color, you will for sure be the only.
But I actually think it's probably more prevalent than that. That there's so many white norm spaces, right? If you want to have proximity to the arts or fancy dinners,
Yeah.
or getting dressed up or getting a wedding dress, right? These spaces that are going to be white dominant.
Yeah. Yeah. And then I think too about how
I
people,
would like white girls are never going to go to a black club.
which is so interesting. Oftentimes, like if you're on vacation,
Right.
or
If you're on vacation, like think about when we were in Tulum. I mean, Tulum was a little bit different because I think Tulum actually was pretty diverse.
Yeah.
But a lot of those spaces we were in were white dominant
Yeah.
in terms of the tourists.
Yeah, for sure. I mean, because it also is about like money and
Right.
resources and stuff
Who
too,
travels and who, like,
and who doesn't, and where they get to go. But I find it fascinating that there is this fear of going into spaces that are different. And you even brought up the point before about sometimes when people that you know will vacation, they will just replicate their experience,
yeah,
the whiteness that they experience every day.
So like, we were talking about this, that there's this kind of monotony of travel
Yeah.
that is, so there's like a monotony of living, right? Where people, because of a lot of reasons, end up in environments where they're surrounded by a lot of people with similar experiences or similar socioeconomic status, or similar jobs or whatever. But then I found that a lot of people travel the exact same way to spaces or hotels or places that kind of replicate that same experience.
I honestly grapple with this, Margo. I do, because I like nice things. I love the soft life, especially when I travel. I
She
want
likes
to be
really nice things.
I do. I want to be comfortable. I feel like that is just my birthright, right? I seek the most comfortable path in everything, from the couch to my mattress to my clothes to my heels to my car. Like I want to be comfortable, and that comes with a price, and it comes with privilege and resources that are required for that thing, right? But how do I, as an activist, navigate a space where I know too often that is going to be synonymous with whiteness, but me as a Black woman who is justice oriented, like, am I giving my resources to the wrong places and things, knowing that people who look like me are not going to be allowed in for a host of structural issues?
I don't know. I don't think so. I think it's more other people's lack of self-knowledge and lack of innovation. And so they want to move in groups. So it's not that well, I don't know. I can't speak to that. But I do think that there is this thing where it's easier to go through life in a group, doing things in tandem with other people that seem socially acceptable.
Yeah.
And if, too bad, like my kids or I don't have many people in our lives that are different than us, like that's just a negative consequence. But it's like, I want my kids, it's like all of the things. It's the NIMBYism, right? It's like, I want my kids to be safe. I want my kids to be in a good school district. I want my kids, blah, 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 blah. All these things that people tell themselves of why they make the decisions that they make, when the underlying reason is structural racism.
For sure.
And so how do we combat that? And that's a much bigger question. But I think,
hell yeah.
But I think, for sure, in communities that we live, we've seen this over and over, particularly in our age group, where people were really committed to living in a certain area until a certain point.
Yeah, yeah. I think for me, the way that I've had to reconcile the question that I just posed is that I deserve to be in any environment that I step foot in.
Absolutely.
Period. And just because there's not someone there who looks like me does not mean that I'm any less deserving. And I feel like, you're going to learn today. If you've never been around a Black person, today's your lucky day. If you've never known a Black woman who's had a bald head and full lips and a wide nose, well, hey, nice to meet you. My name is Tashira, right? Like, I have no trepidation about entering those spaces.
No, I know you don't. And you're right. And you shouldn't bear that responsibility.
I know.
You know what I mean? So It's both and, right? Like, sure, you should and do and must have access to all the same spaces that I do. And why do you have to feel like you have to explain your identity in those spaces in a way that maybe I don't.
Yeah, I mean, I had that in a really big way maybe about 2 or 3 years ago. Remember when I was turning 39, I think, and I went to Palm Springs and found like this hotel, the resort.
Oh yeah, and the couple, you befriended this couple, and they were like, "How did you find out about
and
this
they
place?"
kept asking me the same question to the point where I like sent you a text like, "Yo, what is this?"
Yeah, I remember that. And it's like, how did you find out about this place? That's what I mean. It's like, I mean, I have no idea what hotel you went to, but like this idea that people move together.
Yeah.
And you were not part of her togetherness.
And so she's like, how
did someone like you and your partner, who was a woman.
Absolutely. You're young, you're black, you're two women. Like so much of this is
didn't
outside
make any sense.
The normative lens. This is so interesting. So then, okay, can I ask you a real question?
Yeah, anything.
What is up with the white guilt and fragility? Because sometimes I feel like people are only trying to befriend us because they feel bad. Or trying to like, be like, I'm down, I'm cool.
White fragility is a thing. And I think white guilt is a real thing. So I think it's both and, right? I think there are a lot of white people who feel a lot of guilt about the harm that white people have caused.
Okay.
Even if they were not part of perpetrating that harm. And they've benefited from that harm. We all have. And how do you reconcile that as an individual who's just trying to make their way every day like anyone else? And so I think I don't have the answers for that, but I think it goes back to authenticity and intention, right? And I'm going to tell a story. So I have this old colleague of mine, Peter Sessa. He used to run the community business clinic at Northeastern. He's the most hilarious man in the world. He was my best friend at the law school for a really long time until he retired. And he was a legal services attorney for a really long time. He grew up in Brooklyn, Italian American, was and is an environmental activist, kind of has always had boots on the ground as an activist. Did a lot of racial justice work in the 60s and 70s. And he really balks at this idea of white fragility and white guilt. In this way that like maybe has some elements of male privilege, right? Like, why the fuck would anyone... Sorry, Peter, I'm just pretending to be you. Right? Like, why the fuck would you feel guilty, blah, blah, blah. But this tension that like people feel guilty, they don't know what to do, they want to learn, they want to do the right thing, they feel like they're going to say the wrong thing. Oh my God, they said the wrong thing. Tears, white tears.
Mm-hmm.
It's a thing. And oh my God, I cried. I didn't mean to have white tears. Oh, I feel guilty about crying. And I don't know. I don't know. And white people are afraid.
Yeah.
And so I think this is a space, and we're going to continue talking about this tomorrow too, like where we need to really unpack that. Because I think just saying, and I say this with all my love, like what the fuck is up with white fragility? It can be silencing to a lot of white people.
No, thank you.
And it's also true.
Yeah.
Right? And it's also something that like, I think it's important for white people to acknowledge that they've benefited from structural racism.
Yeah.
Or white privilege, right? Like if you are white presenting, but maybe have a different ethnic identity, you're still benefiting from white privilege.
Yeah, because you're white passing. Yes. No, I completely agree. But tell me more about how it can be silencing to say that.
Oh, I just think that a lot of white people will just stop talking. Because they're like, I saw this a lot in court.
Okay.
As soon as someone was like, oh, this is racist, or why is, the DA's prosecution of me is a racist, and then like the conversation just stopped.
Just completely stops. So this goes to...
And it doesn't go anywhere.
Well, but I'm thinking about Ibrahim Kendi's work about how we need to remove all of the like subjective stuff and malicious intent around racist, saying the word racist, calling out racism.
I think
it is
yes.
just a thing.
It's just a thing. And we just need to move past it.
Water is wet. You have benefited from systemic privilege, right? In whiteness.
And we need and I'm speaking to like the white listeners and the white people who follow this podcast, right? We need to acknowledge that we have benefited from it and we may have worked really hard to.
Say more about that.
So I think that there's this idea of like you acknowledge white privilege or that you've benefited from racism, systemic racism, that is, right? Then the achievements that you've made or the work that you've done don't matter.
I see.
And that's not what anyone's saying.
No.
And so we have to be able to just say it. Say it. Because you walk into a space, you walk into a restaurant and you're a white person, you don't have to do what Tashira did last night. Every night that you go to a restaurant. I mean, not every night, but like a lot of nights.
Well, it reminds me of like the Peggy McIntosh Unpacking the Invisible Knapsack, right? That you could live your life, and I want to go beyond race here, right? Hetero or, cisgender, we could live our lives and find people who look like us in every single position, right? Like we could find a cisgender doctor, we could find a cisgender hairstylist who does our nails, mechanic,
right.
and attorney, right? Same thing. You could find white people who are in all these, but depending on what intersection you sit at, the less likely it becomes that you see your reflection in these very important facets of your fucking life.
Like as a teacher.
Absolutely.
As a therapist.
So important.
As a doctor.
So important. As whoever shepherds
a police officer.
And whoever shepherds your spirituality, who is your pastor, priest, reverend, a shaman, whomever, right? This person is supposed to be heralding your relationship
with God.
To God. And imagine not being able to see someone who looks like you in that position.
Or had similar experiences to you.
And what that says about who you are and who you are able to identify with. And so then the question is, across all different types of cultures and identities, is it our job to hold space? And if so, what does that look like?
Yeah. And it's to listen, right? I think there's also this idea of intent versus impact, right? There are going to be certain environments that you're in where you are not going to see your reflection. You come visit me in Vermont, there are no Black people there. They're very few.
Yeah. And it's a shame because it's a lovely place.
It's a wonderful place. And it's a very active place in terms of activism and social justice and food equity and environmental stuff. And there is activism around creating more spaces where people, BIPOC individuals, feel welcomed and should come. But like, there are places in the country where there's just not a lot of diversity. And also, why? And how can we make it better? Right? There are going to be Black children who are growing up in Maine who are not going to see their reflection. What do we do then? How do we make it better for them?
For sure. And I also think about, I have a trans brother, and about what it would have been like for him when he was much younger, to have had a teacher or a coach or deacon at the church or someone who could have seen him and helped him to understand not only is it okay, but my life is happy and fulfilled and yours can be too.
Right.
And I think
you can see your reflection in me.
Absolutely. Absolutely. It is just so incredibly vital. And so when we think about who we are holding space for, we're not going to be able to create friendships if that person isn't even at the fucking table. Do you know how many Black students there were at Georgetown? So the fact that I even got a chance to meet you in and of itself is a bit of an anomaly, right? We met because of one of the most elite institutions in the country. And nobody that I know had ever had that experience outside of me.
Right. And so that gets to kind of being Black or being different in elite institutions, which I think is something that you and I both can speak to from different perspectives. And the book, like, why are all the black kids sitting together? And I was telling you the story of my high school. I went to a prep school, and there were 4 dining halls. It was a building, and there were 4 dining halls. There was lower left, lower right, upper left. And I can tell you to this day, I graduated from high school in 1999. Okay, I'm 41 years old. I went to high school a long time ago, and I can tell you to this day who sat in which dining hall. Lower right, all the black kids.
So literally the book, literally the title of the book.
I think maybe the book came from my high school.
Wow.
I don't actually know that, but
it was. I mean, it's a very obvious case study.
And there's this idea, and you talked about something so powerful last night when we were talking about this, about for black professionals to be successful in professions where there's a white dominant norm, there's something that has to give, and often it's their blackness.
Absolutely.
And I think about that a lot with academia in particular, which is this medium that we speak of that helps allegedly equalize the playing field, right? And even in those places where we're trying, I think, it's this designer diversity, right? Where we're progressive, but we're diverse, but we're actually white dominant.
Yeah. Because and I do a lot of equity trainings and work around this, because you don't have to be white to advance white supremacy, right? So oftentimes, even in black spaces, because we have been taught that whiteness is rightness, and we have been indoctrinated into a white supremacist value system, we will uphold the same norms. So white dominant norms can transcend any space, even if that space is either POC owned, operated, and ran, or if that organization or institution has made a commitment to diversity and inclusion. It doesn't matter. We have all been under the same conditioning and social constructs. And so this idea of certain ways of relating and socializing, and a lack of transparency, a lack of open communication, privileging the written word. I mean, all of these things are research-based ways in which we relate within organizations that normalize white dominance. And so if you think someone is
white male dominant.
And so if you think someone is superior to you implicitly, how can you be friends with them? There's just very obviously a power differential that we are sitting at the table walking into. And that's what I think has to be torn down for us to be friends. One of my other friends since high school, Dion, she said to me, the reason you and Margo are such good friends is because you both show up as yourself. I don't feel like I have to code switch. Right? I can say the thing.
And I don't feel like, even when I'm at my most annoying, which, like last night when you wanted coffee, and I was like, oh, Tashira, that's like a lot of caffeine at night. And you were like, don't worry about it. I got it. I'm going to drink coffee at 9 o'clock at night.
Right.
You're good. You don't need to take care of me too.
Yeah.
And I didn't I'm not like, oh my God, Tashira's mad at me. I said the wrong thing. I'm like, no, she just told me I didn't need to worry about her.
Yeah. And that's just that.
And we move on.
And we move on, right? And we've talked about this before. There are times culturally, I've been taught to be transparent. And so when I'm transparent with people and friends, I'm not being mean. I'm just doing the thing that I've been taught to do.
So I actually think this is something really interesting. And I think it is, I don't know, but when I think about some of the friendships that I've lost over the last couple of years, or in general in life, I think maybe it's because I either have wanted to be transparent, or in my mind I was transparent, or I just didn't want to keep up for keeping up in the same way anymore.
I believe it 100%.
Right? I was like, I'm just over this. This is not a friendship, or this is not authentic.
So some of this it's not even about navigating difference. It's just about being a good person and a good friend.
And what one needs in friendship. That is very different for different people. I think a lot of people are totally happy and maybe want not to have close friends.
That's true too. Yeah.
And I don't want a lot of close friends.
Yeah.
That's real.
That's part of being a big age. right?
I have a few close friends. That's good. I have a lot of not close friends.
Yeah.
I also like that. Last question or last topic for this episode, which I think is something that is tangible that maybe folks can move with and we can keep talking about in the private community, is if someone is interested in kind of breaking out and meeting new people,
Yeah.
what advice do we have? What do you think?
Number one, I think we have to move beyond, as you mentioned, NIMBYism and outside of our own backyards, like in a very literal sense. So I would interrogate, where are you grocery shopping? Where are your kids going to school? Where are you going to yoga? Where are you working out? Where are you working, right? I think all of those
How
things.
are you getting there?
All of those things are really important to actually literally be around, in a very physical sense, people that are different from us. And the other thing is, I think that we have to be active bystanders. You know, if I'm going to work and there are no trans people there are no queer people there. And if they are in these low-level positions based upon the organizational hierarchy. How am I holding space? How am I advocating? If I'm on a hiring committee, or if I'm able to advocate for a hiring committee, how am I seeking diversity and inclusion in every aspect of my life? And it seems like a huge burden, but I actually don't think it is. I think it is like the rent we pay for a living, or whatever the quote is, right? That is our responsibility as people.
I think that's a really powerful and very tangible thing that we can do. And it's something I know you and I have both actively tried to do in the spaces, in the institutions that we have been a part of.
Yeah.
I think there's also something that has been just a blessing for me over the last couple of years, is just trying new things.
I love that.
And just kind of sticking with it if they're helpful, and if not. Like you and I've talked about, over the last year, I've done the most randomness shit, right? I took a tap class that was like 6 classes. I took horseback riding lessons. I took a photography class. I got a yoga training certificate. I've done really, I like did 2 polar plunges. I don't know. I've done really random stuff that I would have never done before. And each one has brought very important lessons for me, even when I haven't enjoyed them.
Yeah.
And so I think kind of getting out of it's really easy to just stay in our lane, right? Like doing things that feel really comfortable with people that we know, in places that feel very safe. But I don't know. I mean, I have met more people in the last year and a half than I have in the last 10 years.
And I want to say something that reminds me of what we talked about last night, that I want to say specifically to our Black listeners, that I'm keenly aware that we have been raised very often to believe, and this is probably very true for Black immigrants especially, that you don't make friends at work.
We talked about this. This is
that you go to work, you come home, you do your job is for a paycheck, you come home, and that's where your life is. Your job is not your life, and your job is definitely not your friends. And it goes back to also not being able to trust people at work. I just wonder, and I'm saying this as a solopreneur, so I'm definitely biased because I can make this decision without harm or consequence. But I just wonder what would happen if we relaxed that a little bit and we allowed for ourselves to just be a little bit more open, because we met at work.
We met at work.
We met at work.
Right.
And that's often where the most diversity is.
And so I spoke about this. So first of all, you and I would have never met but for work.
Yep.
So, and how we both ended up at Georgetown is also just the universe, right? I was not their first choice. And in fact, got my job because someone decided not to show up to the job.
Oh, wow.
And you didn't start at Georgetown.
I did not.
Right? And so both of us ended up at Georgetown kind of through these circuitous routes, both of us feeling maybe like we didn't belong.
For sure.
In kind of very shaky times of our lives.
Yeah.
I had left my whole family. I had just recently gotten married, and we were separated for the first year of our marriage, right? Like there was a lot of things going on for both of us. Yeah. I don't want to speak for what was going on in your life.
I'll say it. I was in a very abusive and toxic relationship.
Okay. So we met, we were brought together by this very elite institution, and we became friends at work.
Yeah.
And I thought, I've been thinking about this so much. I have shared just a little bit because my dad doesn't want me to share too much about my dad's recent health emergency where he was hospitalized for 3 months. And over the course of those 3 months, my family and I were at medical establishments every single day. ICUs, step-down units, and hospitals for 3 months. And we met so many people, both in New Hampshire and in Massachusetts, nurses, respiratory therapists, social workers, physical therapists, occupational therapists, doctors. The amount of diversity in medical institutions in major cities in this country is outstanding. Outstanding in the sense that no one is from anywhere. Everyone is from everywhere. I mean, in any given day, there's lots of countries represented, lots of languages, lots of ethnicities, gender orientation, blah, 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 blah. And I mean, the healthcare system is so fucked up, and how we interrelate or relate with healthcare workers, right? And my dad and I, particularly my dad, over the last 3 months showed just an incredible interest in talking to everyone and learning about where they were from and their experiences and how they ended up at these different hospitals. And I just kept thinking, wow, this is actual diversity at every level, and no one's talking to each other. But there's an opportunity here.
I was just about to say, but there are opportunities. The question is, what do we do about it? So I'm blessed to have you as a friend, my G.
Same.
I appreciate you.
I appreciate you.
That is the end of our cross-cultural friendship episode. Please drop down in the comments if you're watching on YouTube, or leave us a review wherever you're listening to this, because we want to know, what has your takeaway been? What advice do you have?
What are you interested in?
Absolutely. Absolutely. I think that for this podcast in particular, in our friendship, it is not lost on us the way that this looks optically. And so we want to definitely make sure we are holding space and opportunity for us to have deep conversations.
Absolutely. Thank you.
Thank you, friend. I'll see y'all next time.
Bye.